But we begin tonight with the defendant ID'd at the Fulton County Jail as P01135809. This is the real Donald Trump, not the fictional character millions of people have been led to believe in. This man has never been a billionaire. He never was a brilliant real estate developer. The master businessman seen on The Apprentice for so many years was a fiction, a creation of the show's producers, nothing more. But that fictional character was somehow able to hoist himself into the White House. And like many facades, this one was always going to crumble. Yesterday, those 22 minutes Trump spent going through the booking process in the Fulton County Jail must have been the worst humiliation of his life. And yet, even in that moment, he could not bring himself to let go of that fictional character, the man he wanted to be but never could. His booking record declared that PP113589A's weight was 6'3", and his height as being 6'3", and his weight being 215 pounds. Not only would that put him nearly 30 pounds lighter than his disclosed weight at the time of his last official White House physical, it would mean he had nearly the exact same physical stats as heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali in his prime. I'm just going to let you decide if you buy that. And while the fictional character isn't real, the crime syndicate he put in place is very real, and the people connected to it are likely to pay the price. Their reputations, their careers, and even their freedom are on the line. All 18 of Trump's co-defendants have now surrendered alongside their ringleader. And remember, this is the man countless people believed in so much that they were willing to commit crimes on his behalf. More than 1,000 people have been charged in connection with his attempts to overturn the 2020 election, which he lost. Many are sitting in prison right now, tonight, because in their rank idolatry, they raised him up as a false god. And now their golden calf has begun to melt away, revealing the cheap tin underneath. And as Trump made his way to the jail yesterday, I was reminded of the saying, it's not about the destination, it's the journey. Now, I can't say what Trump was thinking about as he made his way from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport to the jail, but his journey through Atlanta was spectacularly poetic. Along the route were multiple tributes to Georgia's own Jimmy Carter, a president often maligned in office but revered in his post-presidency and in history. For Trump, it's quite the opposite. He also had to roll through some of Atlanta's best-known, predominantly black communities, passing through the neighborhoods housing HBCUs, attended by some of the same black voters he tried to disenfranchise. His journey with his fleet of SUVs did not take him past Tyler Perry's 200-acre movie studio, where surely he would have rather been visiting to attend a big party or a gala surrounded by celebrities, which is all he ever really wanted in life. It's where he thought he would end up, in fact. And not as the first former president in our country's history with a booking number and a mugshot. A mugshot that's been splashed across newspaper front pages, not just here at home, but around the world. Trump's humiliation yesterday would be a perfect ending to his reality show life. But the threat of the man behind this fictional character remains, because there is the real chance that he could once again find himself behind the Resolute desk in the White House, because at this moment, he remains the Republican frontrunner. Joining me now is Melissa Redmond, law professor and director of the Prosecutorial Justice Program at the University of Georgia, Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation and the president of the National Action Network. Three great people to talk to on this Friday. I'm going to go right down the middle and talk to you first, Michael Beschloss, because I would like for you to set the sort of historical moment for us and how we should be thinking about this. For me, it was the karma, to be honest. It was him going through those black neighborhoods. It was him going past Jimmy Carter, you know, the sort of reverential monuments to Jimmy Carter. And it was the fact that, you know, his whole facade and his whole bravado, you know, were completely trumped, if I could use that word, by the fact that he had to take that booking photo. No matter how much he rehearsed, he still had to take it. What to you is the thing that we should be thinking about?
Well, I'd love to begin with a little bit more historical karma, and that is that for those who don't know, the Fulton County Jail This is so appropriate that we've got the Reverend here tonight and Bernice King, because it's a huge moment in Martin Luther King Jr. history. October of 1960, he was leading a sit-in at Richard's department store in Atlanta. He was arrested by the local Atlanta authorities. They took him where else? An earlier building, but same place, Fulton County Jail. And they were threatening to take Dr. King to a much more notorious and dangerous Georgia prison. Mrs. King was terrified. She thought that her husband would never survive being thrown into that prison with its vicious and violent racists. And so John Kennedy's entourage made a call to the governor, and the judge famously got Dr. King out. But what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is, in 1960, this great iconic champion of human rights, of civil rights, of voting rights, was being stopped in this jail so that he couldn't keep on his work expanding those rights. Here we are, 2023, a guy who's about as close to being the opposite of Dr. King as I can think of would be Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is the opponent of those civil rights and human rights and voting rights. And he proved that in what he tried to do in Georgia. Thank God he's being brought to justice. And where is it happening? The Fulton County Jail. You know, life has turned around, the cycle has turned, and as Dr. King, I think, would say, the arc of the moral universe may be long, but tonight it seems to be, at least in Fulton County, bending toward justice.
You see, this is why it's great to have a historian friend around. And also, a real friend will also tease your later segment, because, yes, we do indeed have Bernice King on the show tonight. So this is a real friend. And also my friend and big brother, Reverend Al Sharpton. This is a perfect place to bring you in. Because, yeah, there is so much resonance to this happening in Georgia, Rev. I mean, you think about the fact that Georgia passed these laws to do runoffs to make it harder for black folks to get elected in that state. And yet, Fani Willis is here. She was elected. And because she was elected, this black woman is bringing justice to Trump in a way nobody else was willing to do, including making him take a mugshot. And I want you to ruminate on that last piece of what Michael Beschloss said, because I think it's a perfect place to come in. Donald Trump's supporters, including Marjorie Greene et al., she represents a part of Georgia, are trying to use his booking photo as some sort of badge of honor and making their own fake booking photos, as if they are like the civil rights workers in the 1960s who did have their booking photos as badges of honor because they were fighting to expand voting rights. These people think they can cosplay as that with and for Donald Trump. So you, as a civil rights leader, Rev, I'm going to let you respond to that.
I think that when you look at the iconic pictures of Dr. King mugshots, and those that fought in the civil rights movement and went to jail. When you look at Donald Trump's mugshots, aside from him trying to figure out how to pose and what he wanted to look like, because everything to him is branded, you also have to look at what he is in the mugshot for. He's in the mugshot for trying to rob the votes of people that suffered and died to have that right to vote, that Dr. King gave his life for, that Mrs. King gave her life for. And I think as we remember the March on Washington, and we're in Washington having a march tomorrow, and we're here, Reverend Bernice King, still my favorite preacher, is going to be on your show today. And Martin is here, Martin III, and all of us remembering that dream, but fighting what we're dealing with today, all of which Donald Trump helped to try and pull back. Don't forget, affirmative action is now still, because Donald Trump stacked the Supreme Court. We saw the rights of LGBTQ people stifled because of that court. So Donald Trump did a lot to wreck America, but he's wrecked his life. He is the Wizard of Oz of politics. When we look behind the curtain, we found out the wizard wasn't a wizard at all. And that is what happened when we saw him pull up to the Fulton County Jail on yesterday. I thought about James Brown, the Godfather of Soul, who you know, Joy, was like a father to me. His favorite scripture in the Bible was the 37th Psalm. Fret not thyself because of evildoers, either be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. because they shall soon be cut down. God didn't give a date. The psalmist David didn't give a date. He just said soon. And yesterday, as I watched him ride through the black areas of Atlanta to be booked and fingerprinted and mugshot, I know that soon caught up with Donald Trump.